Lyra had grown up on a planet far from Earth, a world called Varellus. It was a planet of tall, sparkling cities, advanced technology, and peaceful harmony. Her people, the Varellians, were a proud and ancient species. They had existed for thousands of years, and throughout that time, they had built their society based on logic, reason, and strict tradition. One of their strongest traditions was the vow that every Varellian made as soon as they came of age. This vow was simple, yet powerful. It stated, "Not with a human." This vow was taken very seriously. It wasn't just a rule. It was a belief, a way of life. Lyra had been taught this vow from the moment she could understand words. Her parents, her teachers, and even the elders of her community had warned her about humans. They told her that Earth was a place of chaos and disorder, a planet full of violent emotions, unpredictable actions, and strange customs. The humans were considered primitive and untrustworthy. They were seen as far below the Varellians, who had mastered peace and understanding long ago. Lyra believed in this teaching wholeheartedly. She had never questioned it. The idea of interacting with a human in any deep way, let alone forming a relationship, seemed impossible to her. After all, the Varellians had their own sophisticated ways of doing things. Why would they need anything from such a chaotic and unrefined species like humans? As Lyra grew older, she became more involved in her planet's politics and diplomacy. She became a scientist, highly respected in her field, and was eventually chosen to represent Varellus in an important diplomatic mission to Earth. The purpose of her visit was to evaluate humanity's progress and decide whether they were ready to join an intergalactic alliance with Varellus. She was excited, of course, but there was also a small part of her that felt uneasy. The thought of meeting a human face to face was daunting. What if they were as wild and unpredictable as her people had warned her? Lyra couldn't imagine herself sitting down for a meaningful conversation with a human. She had always been taught that such a thing was simply not possible. The day she boarded the Varellian starship headed to Earth, she repeated the vow to herself one last time. Not with a human. It was a simple statement, but it carried all the weight of her people's history. It was more than just a rule. It was a protection against the unknown. The Varellians had spent years perfecting their society, and Lyra had no intention of letting a human interfere with that. As the ship soared through the stars, Lyra sat alone in her quarters, staring out at the vast expanse of space. She tried to focus on the mission at hand, telling herself that this was about diplomacy, not about making friends. Earth was a place of science, not emotion. She would do what she was trained to do, assess the humans, and report back to her people. That was all. But even as she tried to calm herself, Lyra couldn't shake the feeling that something would be different on Earth. She didn't know what it was, but something deep inside her whispered that her visit would change her in ways she couldn't yet understand. When the ship finally landed on Earth, Lyra took a deep breath and stepped out onto the foreign soil. The air was thick with moisture, and the sky was filled with clouds, so different from the clear skies of Varellus. Her first few hours on Earth were spent adjusting to the sights and sounds of the strange new world around her. The humans she met were curious but polite, treating her with respect, but also a clear sense of wonder. Lyra found herself studying their expressions closely, trying to read them. The humans were so different from her own species, emotional, spontaneous, and unpredictable. Every moment felt like an observation. She had come to Earth to understand them, but so far, she only felt like an outsider, distant and cold, watching from the sidelines. Still, she stuck to the vow. She would not allow herself to become too involved with them. She would remain professional and focused. But then, something unexpected happened. Lyra was introduced to a human named Jack. He was a scientist like her, and they would be working together on the project that brought her to Earth in the first place. Jack was curious about her species, eager to learn from her knowledge, and yet there was something in his eyes that made Lyra feel uncomfortable. He seemed to look at her differently than the others. While the other humans treated her as an ambassador from another world, Jack treated her like a person, not an alien. At first, Lyra was annoyed by his casual attitude. He didn't seem to take her seriously enough. After all, she was a respected scientist, sent on an important mission. Why couldn't he just see her for who she was, instead of seeing her as some kind of exotic creature? But as the days passed, something started to shift. Jack didn't shy away from her. He spoke to her with respect, but also with warmth and kindness, something Lyra wasn't used to. He would ask her questions, listen to her ideas, and even share his own thoughts, something the other humans had not done. Slowly, Lyra began to realize that Jack wasn't like the human she had been taught about. He wasn't chaotic or unreasonable. He was curious, intelligent, and, despite his human origins, kind. At night, when Lyra lay awake in her quarters, she couldn't help but wonder, could it be possible that the humans weren't as wild and unpredictable as she had been taught? Could there be more to them than the simple, crude creatures her people had warned her about? The thought of questioning her people's teachings made her feel uneasy, but the more she interacted with Jack, the more she began to doubt everything she had been taught about humans. But no matter what, Lyra knew one thing for certain: not with a human. It had been her people's vow for generations, and she would not be the one to break it. But as she looked at Jack, she felt a tug in her chest, one that she couldn't explain. Something about him made her wonder if maybe, just maybe, there was more to life than the rigid rules of her people. For now, she would keep her distance. She would stay focused on her mission and avoid forming any personal connections with humans. She was determined to follow the vow. But deep inside, she couldn't help but wonder how long she could keep her heart locked away. Lyra had never been to Earth before. The planet was strange and chaotic, so different from Vorelis. Her homeworld was orderly and calm, a place where everything had its place, and everything worked smoothly. In contrast, Earth felt like a whirlwind of noise, movement, and unpredictability. But now, Lyra was here for a mission, and she had to focus on the task at hand. The mission was simple but important. Assess whether humanity was ready to join the Galactic Alliance, a group of advanced civilizations that shared knowledge, technology, and peace. Earth, with its recent progress in science and technology, had caught the attention of the Alliance. Lyra had been chosen to visit the planet as a representative of Vorelis and help determine whether humans were capable of becoming part of this prestigious group. It was a big responsibility, and Lyra felt the weight of it on her shoulders. The first few days on Earth were filled with meetings, data exchanges, and scientific observations. Lyra spent her time at a high-tech research facility, working alongside human scientists, including Jack. She was impressed by the progress humanity had made in recent years, but at the same time, she couldn't shake off her feelings of superiority. To her, the Varelians were light years ahead of humans in almost every way. They had perfected space travel, medical technology, and energy sources. They had eradicated war, hunger, and disease long ago. Humans, in Lyra's mind, were still so primitive in comparison. Every day, Lyra met new people, scientists, diplomats, and leaders from different fields. She had been briefed about Earth's history, the wars humans had fought, the troubles they still faced, and their chaotic political systems. It all seemed so messy to her, yet there was one thing she couldn't deny. The humans had a certain passion about them. They were driven, eager to learn, and determined to push beyond their limitations. It was something that fascinated Lyra, even if she didn't fully understand it. Her primary task, however, was not to get distracted by these feelings. Her mission was to collect data, conduct research, and prepare a report for her people back on Vorelis. She had to remain impartial and focus on the bigger picture. Was Earth ready to join the Galactic Alliance? Could humanity be trusted to follow the strict codes of conduct and peace that the Alliance stood for? That was what she needed to decide. As she worked with the human scientists, including Jack, Lyra found herself growing more and more intrigued. Jack, in particular, was different from the other humans she had met. While most of them were eager to impress her with their knowledge or technology, Jack was different. He seemed more interested in having a conversation, sharing ideas, and learning from her experiences. He wasn't like the others who treated her as an alien, something to be admired or feared. Jack treated her like a colleague, someone whose thoughts and ideas mattered. At first, Lyra resisted getting too close to Jack. It wasn't that she disliked him. Quite the opposite. Jack was charming in a quiet way, smart, and deeply curious. But that was precisely why Lyra knew she needed to be careful. He was human, and humans, according to everything Lyra had been taught, were not to be trusted when it came to personal connections. The Varelians had lived for centuries with a clear boundary between themselves and humans, and Lyra had vowed to uphold that boundary. Yet the more time she spent with Jack, the harder it became to keep her distance. They spent hours working together on their research, discussing the similarities and differences between Varelis and Earth. Jack was always asking questions, trying to understand her culture, her thoughts, and the way her species had evolved. Lyra found herself answering his questions with surprising ease, opening up in ways she hadn't expected. It was as though Jack saw her not just as an alien, but as a person with experiences and knowledge to share. It wasn't just the conversations that caught her attention. It was the little things, the way Jack always listened carefully when she spoke, the way he respected her opinions even when they differed, and the way he made her laugh with his dry sense of humor. These small moments were slowly breaking down the walls Lyra had built around herself. She had come to Earth to assess humanity and stay focused on her mission, but now she was beginning to question everything she had believed about humans. One evening, after a long day of research, Jack invited Lyra to dinner. It wasn't a formal event. It was just the two of them at a small, quiet restaurant in the city. At first, Lyra hesitated. It wasn't protocol. She wasn't supposed to form personal relationships with humans, but something inside her nudged her to go. She had spent so much time analyzing humans from a distance, trying to remain detached. Maybe it was time to get to know them, to understand them on a deeper level. Over dinner, Jack asked her more personal questions about her life on Varelis, her family, and her experiences. Lyra was surprised at how easily the conversation flowed. She talked about her childhood, her studies, and her dreams for the future. For the first time since arriving on Earth, she felt a sense of connection, not just as an ambassador, but as a person. Jack listened with genuine interest, making her feel seen and heard in a way no one had before. That night, Lyra couldn't sleep. Her mind was racing. She had gone to Earth with one purpose: to assess whether humanity was ready to join the Galactic Alliance. But the more she interacted with Jack and the other humans, the more she realized that her initial judgment had been far too narrow. She had come to Earth thinking that humans were chaotic and primitive, but now she was starting to see them in a different light. Yes, they had their flaws, just like every other species, but there was something in their spirit, their drive, that was undeniable. Lyra tried to push these thoughts aside. She couldn't afford to get distracted. Her mission was about the future of Varelis, about the safety and well-being of her people. But even as she reminded herself of this, she couldn't help but feel that the humans were more complex and interesting than she had given them credit for. Her task wasn't getting any easier. The more time she spent on Earth, the more her feelings began to shift. She had come to this planet with a clear mission and a firm vow to stick to her duty. But with every conversation, every interaction, she found herself questioning that vow. Could a human be trusted? Were they really as unpredictable as her people believed? And most importantly, could she really stay distant, or was there something more to her feelings toward Jack than she was willing to admit? As Lyra continued her work, the questions piled up in her mind. She knew one thing for certain: the mission wasn't as simple as she had thought. The more she saw, the more she realized that understanding humanity was far more complicated than simply following her people's old beliefs, and she was beginning to wonder if she could ever truly follow the vow, not with a human after everything she had experienced. Lyra had been on Earth for several weeks now, and things were starting to feel different. She had spent much of her time observing the humans, focusing on her mission. Yet the more she interacted with them, the more her world seemed to shift. Humans were unpredictable, yes, but there was something else too. Something she hadn't been able to ignore. It was a certain warmth, a kind of raw emotion that seemed to pour from their hearts. It was so foreign to her Virelian upbringing, where everything was carefully measured, controlled, and logical. But then, there was Jack. At first, Lyra hadn't thought much about him. He was just another scientist on the team, someone she had to work with for the project she was assigned to. But now, the more time she spent with him, the more she noticed how different he was from the others. Where most humans saw her as an ambassador, someone to be awed and admired from a distance, Jack treated her like a colleague, someone whose opinions and ideas were just as important as his own. It was a strange feeling. For the first time since arriving on Earth, Lyra didn't feel like an outsider. Jack listened to her, not just to her words, but to her ideas, her thoughts, and her reasoning. He didn't dismiss her or try to impress her. There was no grand gesture, no flashy words. He was simply present. Lyra had to admit, she was starting to look forward to her time with him. At first, she told herself it was nothing, just a passing curiosity. But each day, their interactions grew longer and more meaningful. They found themselves working together on the project late into the evening, brainstorming ideas and sharing insights. It wasn't just the work that brought them together. It was the way they connected. She started to realize that there was something about Jack that made her feel comfortable in a way she hadn't expected. The strange feeling inside her, something she had been trying to push away, began to grow stronger. She couldn't ignore it any longer. Was it possible that she was beginning to like him? It was a thought she quickly dismissed. After all, she had a mission to complete. The vow was clear. Not with a human. She had to stay focused. But try as she might, she couldn't shake the growing sense that something was changing. One evening, after another long day of work, Jack invited Lyra to dinner. It wasn't anything special, just a quiet meal at a small restaurant near the research facility. Lyra had hesitated at first. She wasn't sure if it was a good idea to spend time alone with a human, but something about Jack's invitation felt different from the others. There was no agenda, no hidden meaning. He simply wanted to share a meal and talk. Lyra reluctantly agreed, telling herself it was just to discuss work in a more casual setting. But as soon as they sat down at the small table, Lyra realized that this dinner wasn't about the project at all. It was about them, and it was a realization that hit her harder than she expected. Jack was easy to talk to. The conversation flowed naturally, with laughter and lighthearted comments. They spoke about their work, but they also spoke about their lives. Jack shared stories about his childhood, his favorite books, and the music he loved. Lyra, who had always been taught to keep her emotions in check, found herself smiling and even laughing at times. It was something she hadn't done in years. At first, she told herself to stay distant. After all, she was an ambassador, here to do a job. But every time Jack looked at her with those kind eyes, she felt her resolve begin to crumble. It was like there was a magnet between them, pulling them closer, despite all the barriers she had built. As they finished their meal, Jack leaned back in his chair and looked at Lyra thoughtfully. "You know," he said quietly, "I never thought I'd be sitting here with someone like you." Lyra raised an eyebrow. "Someone like me?" Jack smiled. "Yeah, someone who's from another planet. Someone who's so different. But I don't know, I guess I'm starting to think we're not as different as I thought." Lyra's heart skipped a beat. She had always believed that humans were chaotic, unpredictable creatures, so unlike her people. But in that moment, she couldn't help but wonder if Jack was right. Maybe, just maybe, the differences between them weren't as big as she had been led to believe. Maybe their similarities were greater than she had thought. But before Lyra could respond, Jack's tone shifted, and he looked at her with a more serious expression. "I don't know if you've thought about it, but you and I are kind of from different worlds. It's not exactly easy, is it?" Lyra felt a pang of guilt. She hadn't allowed herself to think about it until now. The mission was important, but so were her feelings. She had always avoided forming personal connections with humans, and now, here she was, sitting across from one, feeling more connected to him than she had ever imagined. "I don't know what you mean," Lyra replied, trying to stay calm, even though her heart was racing. Jack gave a small laugh, but it wasn't a mocking one. It was more of an understanding laugh, one that made Lyra feel vulnerable. "It's just that. I don't think it's so simple. You're here to observe us, to judge if we're ready to join your alliance, right?" Lyra nodded slowly. "Yes, that's part of the mission." Jack's eyes softened. "And I get that. I do. But what if you found something you didn't expect? What if you found that maybe we're not as bad as you thought? What if you found someone worth getting to know?" Lyra's breath caught in her throat. She couldn't believe what Jack was saying. It felt like he had reached inside her, found her deepest fears, and spoken them aloud. For a moment, the world seemed to stop. The noise of the restaurant, the chatter of other patrons, all faded into the background. It was just the two of them, locked in this strange moment. Lyra had never felt so unsure, so conflicted. She had always held her distance from humans, following the rules, the teachings, the expectations of her people. But Jack was making her question everything. She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. She didn't know what to say. She couldn't ignore the pull between them, the connection that had been growing stronger with every passing day. And for the first time since arriving on Earth, Lyra felt something deep within her stir, a feeling she couldn't ignore any longer. Jack reached across the table, gently placing his hand over hers. It wasn't a grand gesture, but it was enough to make Lyra's heart race. In that simple touch, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. A sense of belonging, a sense of possibility. For the first time, Lyra truly questioned her vow. Not with a human. Was that really the only way? Or was there something more waiting for her? Something she couldn't understand yet. The question hung in the air between them, unspoken but undeniable. Lyra spent the following days in a haze of confusion. Ever since her dinner with Jack, her mind had been racing. She had tried to push the thoughts aside, focusing on her mission and a report she had to write, but it was impossible. The connection between them was undeniable. Every time she saw Jack, her heart would race. Every time he spoke to her, it felt like her world shifted. The simple touch of his hand across the table during dinner had stirred something deep inside her, a feeling she couldn't ignore. But how could she reconcile these feelings with her mission? Her purpose on Earth had always been clear: observe, assess, and report. She was an ambassador, a representative of her people, and she couldn't afford to get involved with a human. It was strictly against the rules. It wasn't just a personal matter. It was a matter of duty. The Varelians had lived for centuries with a strict code, and that code had always included maintaining distance from humans. To form a relationship, especially with one like Jack, would be a betrayal of everything she had been taught. And yet the more she tried to push those thoughts away, the stronger the pull became. It was as if her heart and mind were at war with each other, pulling her in two different directions. On one hand, there was her sense of duty, her loyalty to her people, and her mission. She had come to Earth to assess humanity's readiness for the Galactic Alliance. That was her focus. That was her job. And yet, on the other hand, there was Jack. His smile, his laughter, the way he made her feel like she mattered. Was it possible that what she was feeling for him was just a temporary distraction? Or was it something deeper? As the days went by, Lyra found herself struggling to keep her emotions in check. She spent hours in her room, reviewing her notes and reports, trying to concentrate on her mission. But no matter how hard she tried, her mind kept drifting back to Jack. She had worked with many people before, but never anyone like him. Jack wasn't like the others. He didn't treat her as some mysterious alien to be admired or feared. He treated her like an equal. And that, more than anything, made Lyra feel something she hadn't felt in a long time. human. She had always told herself that humans were chaotic, messy, and unpredictable. Their emotions were intense, and their actions often didn't make sense. But Jack was different. He was steady, calm, and kind. He had shown her a side of humanity she hadn't expected. The way he listened, the way he respected her thoughts, and the way he seemed to care about her feelings. It was all so confusing to Lyra. It was as if she had found something she didn't know she was looking for, and now she wasn't sure what to do with it. The tension between her feelings and her duty grew stronger with each passing day. When she saw Jack, all the logical thoughts in her mind disappeared. He had a way of making her forget everything. The mission, the rules, the vow she had sworn to uphold. It was as though, in his presence, nothing else mattered. One evening, after a long day of research, Lyra decided to take a walk outside to clear her mind. The sky was dark, dotted with stars that twinkled like diamonds. It was quiet. No noise from the city, no distractions. The peace of the night should have helped her think, but instead, it only made her more aware of the turmoil inside her. She walked slowly, letting the cool air soothe her. The quiet of the night was broken only by the soft crunch of her boots against the gravel path. Her thoughts, however, were anything but peaceful. She kept replaying the conversation with Jack over and over again in her mind. What if you found someone worth getting to know? His words echoed in her head. She had tried to brush them off, but they kept coming back. Could it really be that simple? Could she truly let go of everything she had believed in just because of her feelings for one human? Was she willing to risk everything for Jack, for something that could never be? She had spent so much time building walls around her emotions, so much time keeping her distance from humans. But now, those walls were crumbling, and she didn't know how to stop it. Her footsteps slowed as she reached the edge of a small garden. The flowers here were vibrant, even in the dim light. Lyra stopped and closed her eyes, letting the cool breeze brush against her face. She wanted to feel calm, to feel in control. But all she felt was a sense of loss, a sense that something important was slipping through her fingers. "You're thinking too much." Lyra froze, her heart skipping a beat. She turned around, and there he was, Jack. He must have been following her, though she hadn't noticed. He was standing a few feet away, his hands in his pockets, looking at her with a soft, understanding expression. "I didn't mean to startle you," Jack said, his voice quiet. "I just saw you walking and thought you might need someone to talk to." Lyra didn't know what to say. Part of her wanted to stay away, to keep the distance she had worked so hard to maintain. But another part of her, the part she had been trying so desperately to ignore, wanted to step closer, to let Jack in. She wasn't sure which part of her should win. Lyra started but stopped herself. "I'm not sure what to say. I'm confused." Jack nodded slowly, taking a step closer. "I get that," he said, his voice gentle. "This whole situation, it's a lot, but you don't have to do this alone." Lyra felt a lump form in her throat. "I'm not supposed to feel this way," she whispered. "I have a mission, and I can't let myself be distracted. But whenever I'm around you, it feels like I can't think straight." Jack's expression softened even more, and he stepped a little closer, though he didn't reach out to touch her. "It's okay to feel things, Lyra. You don't have to deny your emotions just because they don't fit into some plan. Sometimes, the most important things in life are the things you didn't expect. And sometimes, they don't make sense at first." Lyra looked into Jack's eyes, and for the first time since arriving on Earth, she felt like she wasn't alone. His words, so simple, so honest, seemed to reach deep inside her. But at the same time, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was dangerous. If she gave in, if she allowed herself to feel this way, everything would change. Her mission would be compromised. The Varelians would never accept it. She had worked so hard to get where she was, and now everything was at risk. "I don't know what to do," Lyra admitted quietly, her voice barely a whisper. "I don't know how to fix this." Jack smiled softly, his gaze never leaving hers. You don't have to fix it. Just be true to yourself. That's all that matters. His words hung in the air between them, a simple truth that felt like a weight lifting off her shoulders. But that didn't make it any easier. The path ahead was unclear. She was torn between her duty and her emotions, between the life she knew and the life that was calling her towards something she had never considered before. For the first time, Lyra felt like she was standing on the edge of something new. But she wasn't sure if she was ready to take the leap. Lyra had spent the last few days in turmoil. Her mind was a storm of emotions, each wave crashing against her resolve. She had always prided herself on being logical, on following her mission without letting personal feelings get in the way. But now, everything she had been taught was in question. Jack had become more than just a colleague to her. He had become a part of her thoughts, her feelings, and her heart. And that scared her. It was the night before her final report was due. Tomorrow, she would submit her findings about humanity's readiness to join the Galactic Alliance. It was a critical moment in her mission, one that could determine the future of Earth's place in the universe. For the past several weeks, Lyra had kept her emotions in check, focusing entirely on her work. She had promised herself that she would not let anything, especially not a human, distract her. But despite all her efforts, Jack was always there, lingering in the corners of her mind. Lyra sat in her room, staring at the screen that displayed her incomplete report. The words she had typed earlier felt meaningless now. They didn't reflect what she had truly observed. They didn't reflect the change inside her. Every time she tried to write something objective, her thoughts turned to Jack. His smile, the way his eyes would light up when he talked about something he was passionate about. The way he had touched her hand that night during dinner, as if it was the most natural thing in the world. She couldn't stop thinking about how it had made her feel, like everything else in the world had faded away. She stood up from her desk, frustrated with herself. How had things gotten so complicated? She had come to Earth with a clear mission. Observe, assess, report. It was simple, but now she felt like she was standing at a crossroads, with two paths ahead of her, and no idea which one to take. One path was the mission: complete her report, follow the rules, and return to her people. The other path was Jack, something she hadn't expected, something she didn't know how to handle. A soft knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. Lyra hesitated for a moment before walking over to open it. When she did, she found Jack standing there, looking uncertain but determined. "I wasn't sure if you were busy," Jack said quietly. "But I thought maybe we could talk." Lyra felt her heart race. She had known this conversation was coming. She had been avoiding it, but there was no escaping it now. She stepped aside to let him in, her mind racing. Jack walked in, looking around the room as though he were seeing it for the first time. But then his eyes met hers, and Lyra could see the concern in them. There was no hiding it now. He could probably tell something was wrong. "I know we've both been keeping our distance lately," Jack said, his voice steady. "But I can't stop thinking about what happened the other night, when I said that you didn't have to do this alone. I meant it, Lyra. I'm here for you, whatever you need." Lyra's heart skipped a beat. She had never expected Jack to be so open, so vulnerable. It was the kind of honesty she wasn't used to, especially from someone who wasn't from her world. She had always been taught to keep her emotions controlled, to stay detached. But Jack was making it impossible to ignore the feelings that had been building up inside her. "I don't know what you want from me, Jack," Lyra said, her voice trembling slightly. "I'm here on a mission. I can't afford to get involved with you. I told myself I wouldn't." Jack stepped closer, his gaze never leaving hers. "I'm not asking you to forget your mission, but you don't have to push me away either. I've never asked you to choose between me and your work. I just want you to know that I care about you, and I think you care about me too." Lyra opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. Everything she wanted to say was caught in her throat. She had spent so much time building walls around herself, telling herself that humans were a distraction, that Jack was a distraction. But the truth was, she had already let him in. She had already started to care. "I care about you," Lyra finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But that doesn't change the fact that I'm not supposed to feel this way. I'm supposed to be focused on my mission, on what's best for my people. And that doesn't include you." Jack looked at her, his expression softening. "I get it, Lyra. I do. But you don't have to choose between us. You can have both." Lyra shook her head, unsure of what to believe. Could she really have both? Could she truly maintain her loyalty to her people and her mission, and still allow herself to care for someone like Jack? Everything in her training told her that it wasn't possible, that even the smallest attachment to a human could jeopardize everything she had worked for. She had sworn an oath to her people, to the Varelians, and breaking that vow would mean losing everything: her position, her future, and maybe even her place in the Alliance. But as she looked into Jack's eyes, she felt her resolve beginning to crumble. She saw something there, a sincerity, a kindness, that made her heart ache. She had never felt this way before, and it terrified her. "I don't know if I can do this," Lyra said, her voice shaky. "I don't know if I can let myself care about you. It's not just about me. It's about my people. It's about what's best for them." Jack's expression became more serious. "I understand. But sometimes what's best for us isn't always about the rules. It's about what feels right. You're not just a Varelian. You're a person, Lyra. You're allowed to feel, to choose, to make mistakes." Lyra felt a pang of guilt. She wanted to believe Jack, to trust that everything would work out, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she was on the brink of making a decision that would change everything. Her mission, her people, her future, all of it seemed to hang in the balance. She wasn't sure what to do. The weight of her duty pressed down on her, but so did the weight of her feelings for Jack. For a moment, the room felt suffocating. Lyra took a deep breath, trying to calm herself. Her mind was screaming at her to pull away, to stay focused, to remember the vow she had made. But her heart was telling her something else. "I don't know if I can make this choice," Lyra whispered. "But I do know this: whatever happens, I can't deny how I feel anymore." Jack reached out, gently touching her hand. "You don't have to make any decisions right now. Just know that I'm here, and I'll be here no matter what." Lyra looked at him, her heart heavy with the weight of everything she was feeling. The moment of truth had arrived. She had to choose between her mission and the person standing in front of her, the person who had become more important to her than she ever expected. And for the first time since arriving on Earth, Lyra wasn't sure which path to take. The moment of truth had come, and she was about to make a decision that would change her life forever. This expanded version of Part 5. The moment of truth delves deeper into Lyra's inner conflict as she faces the consequences of her emotions and her duty. It builds on the tension between her feelings for Jack and her mission, setting up a pivotal turning point in the story. The conversation between Lyra and Jack is designed to be emotional, keeping the audience engaged with the choices they both face. The days after that conversation were some of the hardest moments Lyra had ever faced. The weight of her decision pressed heavily on her, every waking moment consumed by thoughts of Jack and the mission. She hadn't expected any of this. Coming to Earth had been about duty, about analyzing the planet, gathering information, and delivering an accurate report. She was supposed to remain impartial, focused only on the facts, the data. But now, every fact she looked at felt like it was tied to Jack in some way. Every observation, every conclusion, seemed clouded by the growing feelings in her heart. Lyra found it difficult to concentrate on her work. The report she had to submit was still sitting unfinished on her desk. She had written pages and pages, trying to document humanity's progress, their potential to be part of the Galactic Alliance. But the more she wrote, the more she realized that the report didn't capture the truth of what she had seen and felt during her time on Earth. Her interactions with Jack had changed everything. From the very first meeting, he had made her feel seen. in a way she had never experienced before. He treated her like an equal, like she mattered, not just as a mission, but as a person. And with each passing day, Lyra found it harder to ignore the connection between them. Jack's kindness, his patience, and the way he made her feel. It was impossible to deny that she cared for him. But every time she thought about him, she also thought about her mission, her duty to her people, the Varelians, and the promise she had made to stay focused on her purpose. She had come to Earth to observe, to gather information, and then return to her people with the truth. Her feelings for Jack were a dangerous distraction, and the more she let herself feel, the more she feared what it might mean for the future. If she let herself get too close to Jack, if she allowed this connection to grow, it could ruin everything. Her mission could fail, and the trust her people had placed in her could be lost forever. The Varelians had always been taught to be cautious with their emotions. Feelings like love, passion, or attachment could cloud their judgment. They had never allowed themselves to become involved with humans because of the potential consequences. Humans were unpredictable, emotional, and chaotic. The Varelians believed that such things could threaten their very survival in the universe. And so, Lyra had always kept her distance, focused on the mission, and followed the rules. But Jack was different, and that scared her. What if he was exactly the kind of distraction her people had warned her about? What if her feelings for him led her down a path that she couldn't return from? Lyra spent the following evening walking through the quiet streets, trying to clear her mind. The moon hung high in the sky, casting a gentle glow on the city around her. She had been avoiding Jack for days, afraid that any more time spent with him would make it harder to let go of the feelings she had started to develop. But she couldn't shake the thought that she had to make a choice, soon, and it wasn't going to be easy. As she walked through the empty streets, Lyra found herself back at the small garden where she had first met Jack outside her apartment. The soft rustling of leaves in the trees was the only sound that filled the silence. She stopped and took a deep breath, feeling the cool night air fill her lungs. The quiet helped her think, but it also made the truth harder to ignore. She had never felt so torn in her life. Her heart ached at the thought of leaving Earth, of walking away from Jack. But at the same time, she knew that if she didn't leave, if she allowed this relationship to continue, it could have consequences that she wasn't sure she was ready to face. Her duty as a Varelian came first. But was it fair to ignore the feelings that had grown between her and Jack? Was it fair to deny herself the chance at something real, something she had never experienced before? Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps behind her. Lyra turned quickly, and there he was, Jack. As usual, he had a way of showing up when she least expected it, but in a way, it was also comforting. "I thought I might find you here," Jack said, his voice warm but cautious. "You've been avoiding me." Lyra looked down, unable to meet his eyes. "I haven't been avoiding you. I've been thinking." "I know," Jack said, his voice soft. "About us." Lyra nodded, her heart racing. "I don't know what to do, Jack. I'm not supposed to feel like this. I came here to do a job. And now everything is different. I don't know how to balance this. My feelings for you, and the mission I have. I'm not sure if I can do both." Jack took a step closer, his presence steady and calm. "You don't have to do both, Lyra. You can make a choice." Lyra's heart sank. She had been hoping for something more, something that would let her continue both her mission and her feelings for Jack. But Jack was right. She had to choose. And the choice was not an easy one. "You know the consequences," Lyra said, her voice barely above a whisper. "If I stay, if I let myself care about you, I risk everything. My mission, my future, my people. I'll be betraying them." Jack shook his head, his expression gentle. "You won't be betraying anyone by choosing to be with me. You're not betraying your mission. You're just making a decision for yourself. You deserve to be happy, Lyra. You deserve more than to be stuck in this battle between duty and desire." Lyra closed her eyes, the weight of his words pressing down on her chest. She had spent her entire life following the rules, always doing what was expected of her. She had never allowed herself to make a choice like this, a choice that could change the course of her future. But the truth was, her future was uncertain. She didn't know what would happen tomorrow, or the day after. She didn't know what the right choice was. But she did know one thing. She couldn't keep running from her feelings. For the first time, Lyra realized that her feelings were just as important as her mission. She had always believed that duty came first, that emotion was a weakness. But Jack had shown her something different. He had shown her that it was possible to care, to feel, and still be strong. "I don't know if I'm ready for this," Lyra said, her voice filled with uncertainty. "But I can't deny what I feel for you." Jack smiled softly, his eyes filled with understanding. "I'm not asking you to have all the answers right now. I'm just asking you to choose what feels right for you. Whatever happens, we'll face it together." Lyra looked into Jack's eyes, and for the first time in days, she felt a sense of peace wash over her. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew that the path ahead wasn't going to be easy. She was about to make a choice that could change everything. Her mission, her people, and her life. All of it was in her hands. And as much as it terrified her, she knew one thing for sure. It was time to stop running from the truth. It was time to face the consequences of her feelings. Lyra stood at the edge of the small balcony, looking out over the city that had, in many ways, become her home. The moonlight reflected off the glass of the buildings, casting soft shadows across the streets below. Everything seemed so peaceful, so still. But inside her, everything was in motion, her mind swirling with thoughts, questions, and decisions. She had spent so many nights like this, staring into the distance, unsure of what to do. But tonight, something was different. Tonight, Lyra had made her choice. Her heart still beat heavily in her chest, and there was a part of her that felt uncertain. After all, this was not just any choice. It was the kind of decision that could change the course of her life forever. But even with the fear swirling inside her, she felt something else too, a strange sense of clarity. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't simple, but it felt right. Lyra had come to Earth to complete a mission that she had taken on with pride and a sense of duty. Her people, the Varelians, had sent her to assess humanity and report back on their potential for joining the Galactic Alliance. For weeks, she had stayed focused on this task, doing what she was trained to do, keeping her emotions in check. She had sworn an oath to her people that she would not let anything, especially a human, distract her. But then she had met Jack. Jack had been everything she never expected. He was warm, kind, and fiercely passionate about his people. He had made her see humanity in a new light, one that was filled with complexity, beauty, and even pain. He had shown her what it was like to feel, to care, and to be cared for. And in doing so, he had challenged everything she had believed. For the longest time, Lyra had fought those feelings. She had tried to bury them, telling herself that the mission came first, that her duty to her people was all that mattered. But as time passed, it became impossible to ignore the connection between them. Jack was no longer just a human she was observing. He was someone she cared deeply for, someone who had become a part of her life in a way she had never anticipated. And in the end, she had realized that her feelings for Jack were not a weakness. They were something to be embraced. Lyra took a deep breath, pushing the uncertainty aside. She knew what she had to do. She had to make a new vow, a vow that would combine both her duties to her people and her heart. It wouldn't be easy, and it wouldn't come without consequences, but she was no longer willing to live in fear of what might happen. She had made the choice to follow her heart, and now she had to commit to it fully. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps behind her made Lyra turn. She saw Jack walking toward her, his face full of concern. He had been waiting for her to make up her mind, giving her the space she needed but never pushing her. He had always been patient with her, and that had made everything harder. "Lyra," Jack said softly, stopping just a few feet away from her. "I know you've been thinking a lot. I just want you to know that whatever decision you make, I'm here for you." Lyra smiled faintly, but it was a smile filled with determination. She had spent so much time worrying about the consequences, about how her decision would affect not only her mission but also her future. But now, looking at Jack, she knew that he was a part of her future, no matter what. "I've made my decision," Lyra said, her voice steady, though her heart raced in her chest. "I know what I have to do." Jack looked at her, his eyes filled with hope. "You don't have to make any decisions quickly, Lyra. You have time, if you need more time." "No," Lyra interrupted gently, shaking her head. "I don't need more time. I've had enough time. It's time for me to make this decision, and I've decided to stay. I'm staying on Earth. I'm staying with you." The words hung in the air between them, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. Jack's face softened, and his expression filled with both relief and joy. Lyra could see it in his eyes, the way he had been waiting for this moment, but also the way he had respected her decision to take her time. It was like a weight had been lifted off his shoulders. But it wasn't just Jack who had a decision to make. It was Lyra, too. She wasn't just staying on Earth to be with him. She was making a vow, a new vow. A vow that would not only change her future, but also change her role in the universe. "I made a vow to my people," Lyra continued, her voice quiet but firm. "I vowed to complete my mission, to observe and assess humanity. I knew that if I allowed myself to become too attached, it could put the entire mission at risk. But I also realized that I can't keep living in fear. I can't keep pretending that I don't care about you, that this isn't real." She paused, taking a deep breath before continuing. "My new vow is to not just serve my people, but also to find a balance, to honor my duty while embracing the feelings I have for you, Jack. I won't ignore what we've built together. I can't. And maybe that will make things harder. Maybe my people will not understand, and there will be consequences. But I believe in what we have, and I believe in you." Jack took a step forward, reaching out to take her hand in his. He looked into her eyes, and for the first time, Lyra saw no doubt there. Only trust, only love. "I'll stand by you, Lyra," Jack said softly, his voice filled with sincerity. "No matter what happens, we'll face it together. You don't have to carry this burden alone anymore." Lyra smiled, her heart swelling with emotion. For the first time, she felt truly free. She had spent so long trying to hide from her feelings, trying to suppress the part of her that wanted something more. But now, she had let go of all the fears that had held her back. She had chosen to be true to herself, and in doing so, she had found something even more powerful, someone who would stand by her side. She knew that there were risks. She knew that the Varelians might not approve of her decision, that her mission might be in jeopardy. But for the first time, Lyra felt that her heart was in the right place. She wasn't just choosing Jack, she was choosing herself. She was choosing to live her life fully, to embrace both her duty and her emotions. And that, she realized, was the true meaning of strength. "Thank you, Jack," Lyra whispered, squeezing his hand. "For being here, for understanding." Jack smiled, pulling her closer. "You don't have to thank me. I'm just happy you made this choice. Whatever happens next, we'll face it together." Lyra closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of the new vow she had made. She was no longer bound by the expectations of her people. She had made her choice, and she had chosen love, truth, and herself. And as the moonlight bathed the city around them, Lyra felt a sense of peace settle over her. She had crossed a threshold, and she was no longer afraid of the future. Whatever it held, she was ready to face it, with Jack by her side, and a new vow guiding her forward.